If everyone would like to take a seat, I think we'll get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. I'm hoping most of the people who are turning up in person are here today. We've got numerous people online as well. My name is Karen Silverberg. For those that don't know me, I'm the co-vice president of LBC. My husband, Ayal Marek, is the president of ARTSA, and unfortunately can't be here in person today, but is online, and you'll be hearing from him later. So I just want to welcome you all, and also to those on Zoom, thank you for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's helped bring this evening together, including Kakal and Artsenu, which have helped support ARTSA with this event. And especially I would like to thank the LBC community who are volunteering for us, especially David at the back, who's running Zoom and has been organising all the IT for us, because that's not my thing. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you don't know, the women's toilets are just back outside those doors in that little ante-room as you came in, and the men's toilets are back into the corridor to your left. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that land was never ceded, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and any First Nations people who may be joining us today. I'm really looking forward to introducing this wonderful panel that's on display for you right here. But first I'd like to just give a little bit of a rationale for this event. And why ARTSA, Kakal and Artsenu wanted to pull it together. So really the purpose is to examine the mechanisms driving contemporary anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Our expert panellists will deconstruct how language is manipulated, how historical narratives are weaponised, and really how the law can address the resulting harm. So we really believe this kind of scrutiny is urgently needed in Australia today. Precisely because anti-Semitism today often doesn't announce itself as hatred of Jews. Instead, it often arrives, as we know, dressed as anti-Zionism, which is a political stance that claims moral legitimacy while reproducing some of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes, but just in new forms. So in the past 2.5 years, we've seen synagogue arson attacks, we've known about a foiled mass casualty plot, university encampments where students are feeling targeted for their perceived support of Israel. And then, of course, we had the Bondi attack. And together these events really point to a pattern in which his hostility towards the Jewish state really slides, often deliberately, into hostility towards Jews themselves. Distinguishing this legitimate criticism of Israeli policy from this newer, more socially acceptable vehicle for old prejudice is really one of the defining challenges that's facing Australian public life right now. It really requires more than just intuition, but also really careful analysis of how this slide actually happens. So that's why this symposium has been built around language, history and law, so it's well suited to this moment. Anti-Zionism, as anti-Semitism by other means, works by redefining words so that denying Jewish self-determination sounds like standard anti-colonial politics, and it works by flattening history so that Jewish indigeneity to the land is erased or even inverted. And it does work by testing legal and institutional boundaries so that incitement can shelter under the banner of activism. So it's really important to name these mechanisms. If we treat each incident as separate, we really miss the bigger picture. And if we understand how language, history and legal terms are being used, we're better able to tell the difference between genuine political debate and language that gives permission for hostility towards Jews. So ARTSA believes it's really on each of us to educate ourselves and equip ourselves with the knowledge to push back against the falsehoods and to fight for and understand both the facts on the ground and the reality under international law. So we hope this session helps all of us and the wider community take a step in the right direction. So I would now like to introduce our panel of experts, which I'll do one at a time as they come up to speak. We're not going to be taking questions from them until all three of them have had a chance to present, and which will then have an open Q&A where you can all ask questions, and that applies also to people on Zoom. So first I'd like to introduce our speaker, Melinda Jones, who is a retired human rights lawyer, author of 13 books. She taught law and political science at major Australian universities for over 20 years. Among other positions held, Melinda was Director of the Australian Human Rights Centre at the University of New South Wales, Director of Research at the Australian Anti-Defamation Commission, and immediate past President of the National Council of Jewish Women in Australia. She's currently the Australian representative of Women Wage Peace, which is the largest civil society organisation in Israel. And over the past 3 years, much of her work has focused on understanding contemporary anti-Semitism, the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and how democratic societies can respond effectively while protecting fundamental freedoms. So please welcome Belinda up to the podium.
Thank you, Karen. You described anti-Zionism so well I don't really need to say anything. I actually now know all about it. My field is really law. And I'm not going to talk to you about legal solutions at all tonight. In a way, that's what I should be talking to you about. But in the process of coming to work out what legal solutions there might be to the problems of anti-Semitism, I've had to really do a sort of dive of a level I never imagined into understanding the mechanisms that we're dealing with. Because if we don't understand those mechanisms well, proportionate in your use of force against them, and you've also not allowed to use civilians as human shields. Now, this subject is taught at a lot of schools, including Mount Scopus, and I talked to a student who was doing the same subject, and he said, when we did it, we just talked about just war theory, the things I've just discussed, and we talked about them in general. But at the Catholic school, this 16-year-old was told, I don't really know how to present it, but we're talking about the Gaza war. Would you like to explain to the class what it's all about? And it turned into a tribunal on Gaza. And here is a 16-year-old who's a youth movement person, quite knowledgeable, but she's 16, right? How's she going to have facts and figures at her fingertip when she's going to be knocked down at every turn? I don't know if it's anti-Semitism, I don't know if it's anti-Zionism, if we want to mix up these terms, but whatever it is, it's horrible and shouldn't be happening. And it's happening, I believe, because we've actually, as a society, to a great extent, not all of us individually, bought into an ideology of anti-Zionism. And it's really only today I decided that anti-Zionism was an ideology. My work is work in progress, so I make decisions by the day. And I decided that if we think of anti-Zionism as an ideology, we can see that it's a completely structured thing. Now, an ideology has four features. It explains the world, right? It tells you what the world is doing. It identifies what's wrong in the world. It assigns moral roles to different players, and it says what should be done about those moral wrongs. That's what an ideology does, and they're the general features of an ideology. And if we look at anti-Zionism, it does all of those things, right? Anti-Zionism explains the framework for the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. It says that Israel has no legitimate right to exist. Its raison d'etre is the destruction of the state of Israel. That's anti-Zionism. And it uses things like colonialism and racism, and we'll come back to those things, as to populate its worldview. What's wrong? Well, it's not actually Zionism that's wrong. What's wrong is the Zionist. You know, you go very quickly, you travel very quickly from the Zionism, which is also an ideology, by the way. An ideology is a neutral thing. It's a description of how you describe the world. The Zionist is wrong because the Zionist is, as we know, all sorts of terrible things. I'll come to them in a second. We'll go through the list and make you feel sick. It assigns moral roles to who's the perpetrator, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy in the conflict. And it says what should be done. What we need to do is we need to dismantle the Zionists or the Zionist entity. We need to resist them. We need to abolish Zionism. That's the things. So we've got a whole complete package of what's going on. It's not anything to do with criticism of Israel. Nothing at all. That's just a misnomer completely. So let me... I've got a repertoire of anti-Zionist things, okay? And I'm going to tell you I'm not going to go through the whole process. Oh, actually, let's see how I go. So the proposition, Zionism is racism. It designates Zionists as racist or racial oppressors, and exclusion can be presented as anti-racism. I hate racists. That person is a racist, I'm not going to deal with them. The person is a racist because they're a Jew, and because they're a Jew, they're a Zionist, and therefore they subscribe to Zionism, which means that I'm entitled to hate them. It's very clear, very simple logic. Zionism, Israel is colonial or settler colonial. Now they've said that Zionists are colonizers, foreign oppressors, and that brings all sorts of stigma. I'll come back to the effects more consistently in a minute. Israel Zionists are committing genocide. Being a perpetrator of genocide is one of the worst things you could possibly be. Israel is an apartheid state. Well, after genocide, probably one of the worst things that's ever happened in human history is apartheid. Zionists are Nazis. Zionists are terrorists. Zionists are baby killers. Zionists control government, media and institutions. Jews are white. Zionists have dual loyalty. From the river to the sea, globalise the Intifada. Resistance by any means necessary. Israel has no right to exist. Denial of Jewish peoplehood. No Zionists. Zionists are not welcome. Zionists weaponise anti-Semitism. So if you accuse someone of anti-Semitism, what you're actually saying is you don't want them to talk because you don't like to hear what they've got to say and you're stopping their freedom of speech. So you can't actually challenge anyone who's anti-Semitic, because if you do, that proves that you're an anti-Semite. That you're a Zionist who's shutting them up. Okay, so what we've got is, now you're going to be impressed by some of your characteristics, because I'm prepared to bet that everyone in the room is a Zionist of some sort or other, or probably a Jew, or maybe both. So you are a racist, a coloniser, a foreign oppressor, an apartheid oppressor, a genocide heir, perpetrator of extreme evil, a Nazi, a paradigmatic perpetrator, a terrorist, a dangerous person, murderous, cruel, bloodthirsty, secretly powerful, manipulative, conspiratorial, privileged, powerful, dominant, disloyal, foreign aligned, and the list goes on, morally unacceptable, and basically, who would want to know somebody who had all of these? Oh, and of course I left out diseased, which of course you are. So what we've got is the belief that Jewish self-determination, Zionism, is unacceptable. The Zionists are all these things. So when we do them, I've written this paper out so beautifully, it's on 15 different pieces of paper. The words that I've just read out, when someone's an anti-Zionist and they start using these sorts of languages, they have a social effect. The words don't just sit in isolation. And the sort of social effect I'm looking at is a sort of a social effect that you might be able to deal with. So here are the sorts of things that happen to people as a result of anti-Zionist rhetoric. One is erasure of the Jewish people, erasure of the individual. Your view is no longer acceptable. If you are a witness to something, we're not going to believe you, so you're untrustworthy in that way. You've just been erased. You're going to be designated as something which is this disqualifying characteristic. In all sorts of circumstances, you used to be like someone who worked at Monash. We seem to have lots of people who worked at Monash, right? But now you're not someone who worked at Monash. Now you're a Zionist, and you have all these characteristics I've just talked about. And because you're designated like that, that affects everything else I do with you. Then there's moral positioning. Zionists are placed on the perpetrator side of the perpetrator-oppressor side, and there is a travelling attribution that goes from, we have characteristics of Israel, they travel to Zionists, they travel to Jews, who are also Zionists, and they travel on to the diaspora. It doesn't matter where you are if you're a Jew. So this is like a moving thing as a social activity. You have a your moral status is degraded, who you are as a person. You don't have the same permission to operate in society as you used to have. You can't go into a room and feel confident that you will be heard. You can't go into a room and have a conversation when someone says, let's talk about Gaza, or Gaza's the topic we need to talk about. You can't go into the room and feel safe. You can't even go to school if you go to that Catholic school. Or if you went to Brighton Secondary College, you would have swastikas all around you every day and you had to somehow put up with it. That makes Jews only conditional members of a society. And this is the point about social cohesion. If we're only conditional members, we're not true members of a society, we don't have the same rights as everybody else. Everybody has a right to go to town except for the people who don't. It's like they used to say everybody has a right to sleep under the bridge of the Seine at night, but who wanted to sleep under the bridge of the Seine at night? And if everyone has a right, that's fine, but if no one has a right, you're only picking on one small group of people, even though it doesn't apply to everybody. People then stop recognising what's being said as anti-Semitic, so there's a recognition failure, and as I said, this leads to unequal participation. Now, I thought I would take one example to show you how this works. And I'm just going to go to an apartheid state. Israel as an apartheid state is the example that I thought we'd take. I could have taken any one of the things in this list. Okay, so what does the statement, Israel as apartheid state, do? First of all, it imputes a moral wrong. Apartheid isn't a description, it's about values. The accusation, as I said, travels from state to the person. Israel practices apartheid, Zionism created a sustained Israel. That way they sustained apartheid. Most Jews are Zionists. Zionists who don't renounce Zionism support apartheid. You can, it's like you could convert and stop being a Jew. There was a way out in the past. There's a way out now. You can stop being a Zionist, but nobody will believe you anyway. And so then there's collective guilt and stereotyping. It creates a moral reason to exclude people. Again, you're not being discriminatory when you include somebody who supports apartheid. You're making a moral point. My moral position is apartheid is bad, people who support apartheid are bad, you are a Jew stroke Zionist, you therefore support apartheid, therefore you are bad. Okay? It's nothing to do with Jews, remember. This is, is it anti-Semitism? We have that big question. How do the two relate? It then gives us a loyalty test. Right? If you say to the people, oh well, maybe I believe you're not an anti-apartheid or pro-apartheid. If you give up Zionism, you've now got a problem. What sort of person am I? Right? Am I a good Jew or a bad Jew? Can I be a good Jew and oppose apartheid, or as a good Jew do I support apartheid through my Zionist connection? And it becomes very, very confusing and difficult. And it changes how people perceive Jews. How are you perceived by other people? Well, you're perceived according to the moral categorization that we've seen. You're not wanted. Basically, you're not wanted. It also, as I said before, invalidates Jewish testimony. I'm experiencing anti-Semitism. You're calling criticism of apartheid as anti-Semitic. And then they say that, no, I'm not calling anti-Semitism, apartheid anti-Semitic. I'm calling you, treating me as inferior and morally wrong because I'm a Jew, who you believe, therefore, is pro-apartheid. But in that whole process, it invalidates your testimony. So you go, even if you look, a lot of people reporting events of anti-Semitism on campus, for example, a lot of those people were simply just not believed, or said it wasn't really so bad. It wasn't really so bad. So the next thing that happens, and this is really, really important, as a social process, repetition makes all the difference, or amplification. So there's a whole lot of ways in which your message, or the message of the racist, can be amplified. Right? They do it on social media all the time. Okay? They do it by putting lots of posters up. They do it by having lots of rallies. They do it by making it common parlance. Everyone knows that the Jews are wrong in Gaza. Everyone knows Jews committed genocide because it's in the air, it's been repeated, and we've heard it so many times. So the number of the times something is said adds to the amplification. The physical space it takes up adds to the amplification. You can think of other ways in which a message can go from being something that's straightforward to being amplified. So, if I can find a piece of paper that tells me what I'm meant to do. So, the question then is, what's the impact of all of this? Okay, because if we're going to convince, for example, the Royal Commission that we need intervention in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, we actually need to show that there's been harm. And the harm, I'm just going to give you a list of ways in which this harms, given my 20 minutes, probably close to being up. It makes people question who they are. Can I be both a Zionist and a good person? It creates guilt, shame, and moral confusion. People begin to be worried. They don't know what the right answer to the question. Did Israel really commit a genocide? I couldn't support Israel if Israel committed a genocide. I wouldn't want to destroy it, but I would be, it would make me feel, I don't know what. It holds Jews collectively responsible. So even in Nazi Germany, after the war, there was no attempt to say that every German was responsible for the actions of the Nazis. But there is an assumption that if Jews in Israel, via the IDF, committed a genocide, if they did, it's actually not the responsibility of that force, it's actually the responsibility of all of us. And we can all be condemned and punished for it. It challenges the way other people see us. It damages relationships. I don't know how many of you have had friendships that are over, but a lot of people I know, it's one of the saddest things that's happened in this period of time is people who you thought were people who work colleagues. My worst one was a person from the Women's International League for Peace and Justice, who's a peacemaker, who I've worked with for 20 years, told me after October 7 she could no longer work with me because she was on the other side, and no longer speak to me either. We just happened to be at a meeting together when she told me this. And she said, and I said to her, but surely we should be talking because even if we're on different sides, if we want peace, we have to talk about it. And she said, forget it, we won't talk to you. It silences Jewish voices. It creates a hostile environment. Very often you're in places where you just feel so uncomfortable you can't act. It excludes Jews from equal participation. It creates confusion. It undermines democracy itself because if people cannot participate in the normal way, they cannot be engaged in the normal way, cannot participate, cannot say the things they want to say because they're going to be misunderstood and told they're actually saying something different. So these mechanisms and the harm that's being done need to be understood so we can work out what to do about it. And I actually do have, if you follow my Substack, in my next Substack that's coming out, I'll actually tell you some of the solutions, and they're the legal solutions. But what I want to do now is to do something slightly different, which is go to the handout, because I just want to say, how am I going? Oh, fantastic, perfect time. If you look at this handout, you'll see that I've got my definition, a definition of anti-Zionism, which is different from any other one you might have been sent from me, because as I said, it changes by the day. I've got what's called CHIPS questions. And one of the things I think is that so much of this is so complicated, so difficult to understand, that we need to know and remember how to deal with things. So I'm saying, if the chips are down, think of the letters CHIPS and what is going on. Ask yourself, is whatever's being said accusing someone, Jews, of collective guilt? If it is, it's anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist or both. H, hostile environment. Is the environment you're in hostile? Does this make Jewish people feel unsafe, unwelcome, unable to participate? Then you're dealing with a situation with anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, or both. Illegitimacy. Does it deny the legitimacy of Jewish identity, peoplehood or belonging? And very often you'll find that that's what's going on. Again, that's a place where the chips are down, you are being attacked. Self-determination. I left out P. P is for participation. Does it make equal participation in public life more difficult or conditional? And that goes to whether it's wearing a Magen David, which is the example everyone gives you, or like being in the classroom for that 16-year-old girl. It shouldn't have to be a challenge to be in an ordinary class and feel attacked. And S is for self-determination. Is Jewish self-determination uniquely being denied? Now, the reason I think it's important to have something like the chips is because every day we see in social media or in posters or in letters or whatever, things that are horrible, that we don't want to see. And we have to have some way of trying to sort out, trying to understand what is actually going on. Is it anti-Semitic? Is it anti-Zionist? And you can see I'm on the side of saying that they are more or less the same thing. I think most anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, and there's a tiny slither that's actually legitimate criticism. But there is a big movement at the moment that says otherwise. So I think the chips can be helpful. I find it helpful as a diagnostic tool. And then I've just said on the other side, there are a few things that you can also do, which might sound a bit twee, but they're nonetheless things that actually can make a difference, which is listen to the Jewish experience, don't assume you know what it is. So many of the stories that I've told and heard over this period bear no relationship to what I understood anti-Semitism to be before October 7. Stories like the classroom story, never before will you have had children being expected to defend Israel in a class on a subject that's part of your VCE. Okay, look beyond the words, right? The words are being used as attacks. We'll hear more about that. Use chips. Protect equal participation. If you see other people who aren't able to speak up, try and support them. And speak up yourself whenever you can.
Thank you, Melinda. You'll get another turn to speak shortly. Thank you. Okay, so next I would like to introduce Professor Gilad Zuckerman. Gilad has been a researcher and international academic board advisor of the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy since its establishment in 2004. He was president of the Australian Association for Jewish Studies between 2017 and 2023. He's the author of Revivalistics, From the Genesis of Israeli to Language Reclamation in Australia and Beyond. He was elected Fellow of the Academy of Oriental Scholars in 2011 and the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies in 2014. He's held various competitive fellowships. He's a professor at Flinders University in Adelaide, or was until recently, and Wutong Chair Professor at Beijing Language and Culture University. So it is my great pleasure to hand over to Gilad to talk to us about the linguistics of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Karen, I brought you a present because of the organization. It's a book about Australian universities who like Jews. Would you like to come and get the book?
Right now?
Yeah. I couldn't, Can you open it? What do you see? Exactly. It's a pleasure to be here. It's not my first time here, but it's the first time I speak at LBC about linguistics, because this topic is a very linguistic topic. So I'm very happy to talk linguistics at LBC. You will see that it is actually very much related to the topic today. Can you all hear me well? Also on Zoom, David? So I would like just to tell you that I'm not going to go through everything, but because I'm going to give a proper talk, like 1 hour plus at Adelaide, which is based on this talk, and here we have only 20 minutes. But I would like to report a progress, and this is my introduction. On 28th June 1825, after obtaining his PhD at the University of Göttingen, and to heighten his chances of employment, the Jewish poet, very good poet, Heinrich Heine, was baptized as an evangelical Lutheran Christian. And I want you to know that 200 years later, we have actually made a progress. So what is the progress 200 years later after 1825? The progress now is that Jewish professors, a fortiori Israeli professors in Australia, are unofficially, so there is a progress. He did it officially, so he had to baptize him to get required to declare that they're not Christians, so there is a progress, but simply anti-Zionist. So in other words, if you are, in my view, a Jewish professor at a university in Australia, and you declare that you're in the good book, as Melinda mentioned, there are good Jews and bad Jews. She was hinting at kind of lists of good Jews, we are the good Jews, and it's like othering, as if you declare yourself as anti-Zionist, then you are okay. Now, this is a progress from 200 years ago, because Heinrich Heine had to become a Christian, and he said it was the ticket of admission to European culture. Heine Christianized himself in order to become a professor. This is a fact. I don't know how many of you knew that. Now, before I start with what I'm talking about today, I want to give you 3 examples of things that happened to me as a professor at the University of Adelaide. I actually am still professor at Flinders. I resigned from the University of Adelaide after 7 October. On 26 December 2023, I was threatened by an Aboriginal PhD, so an Aboriginal academic. If you don't come to the anti-Israel demonstration, I'll make sure that no Aboriginal person in Australia would work with you. So if I went to the demonstration, I would have been in the good books, no problem whatsoever. So this is the progress. I gave a keynote in Kalgoorlie, that was 26 October 2023. My keynote was about the Hebrew revival, the language revival in Israel. And somebody asked a question, and I couldn't understand. It was a little bit like Tourette syndrome, when somebody talks and then they say, "Oh, I went there, yes, fuck cookie," and I went, "Fuck cookie," and it was unbelievable. He asked a question, but genocide. It was impossible. I couldn't understand. And it was shocking, not only to me, to everybody in the audience. It was really shocking. He couldn't help it. Genocide, because I'm Israeli. And the third one is 15th December 2021. I talked to a new person who arrived at the university, my university then, which does not exist, by the way, the University of Adelaide. Now there is a merged university. We call it the murder, but they merged 2 universities. 10 minutes I was talking to her, it was wonderful. Then she asked me, and by the way, where are you from? I guess she noticed an accent or something. I said, "Oh, I'm from Israel." I'm not joking. She just turned her back to me and left the room. It was amazing. So this is 2021. So this is before all the... Today, I'm going to talk about 4 fallacies, and I want you to know that The main purpose of this 20 minutes is to give you 4 tools to identify a linguistic manipulation or a linguistic fallacy, if you want to be charitable. I have to say that some of these fallacies are naive in the sense that, people just make fallacies, like logical fallacies. I don't know if you've ever been taught how to identify logical fallacies. For example, petitio principii, there is a logical fallacy. Like somebody says, I don't know, Muhammad said that he is the Son of God, and of course it must be true because the Son of God would never lie. It's kind of circular reasoning. And then if you're a logician, you say, excuse me, I have detected a logical fallacy, petitio principii, begging the question, and then you explain. So the tools that I'm talking about are similar, but they're not logical fallacies, they're linguistic fallacies. So it's a little bit like mathematics, but it's linguistics. The first fallacy that I would like to teach you, and with this regard it is really linguistic teaching, is anachronistically ignoring the crucial semantic difference between Sinn, apropos Heine, he was a German Jew, and Bedeutung. And I will explain it. It sounds hard, but I will make it simple. Sense and referent. The other tool is to detect the etymological fallacy. And this is a known fallacy in linguistics, except that people have never talked, as far as I know, about these fallacies in the context of antisemitism. As far as I know, I'm the first person. The third is etymology or folk etymology, and I'm sure that you all know what folk etymology is, like saying, I don't know, Shakespeare, he was Sheikh Zubir, he was an Arab. That is what professor in Iraq used to say, Sheikh Zubir, so it's an etymological fallacy. And the fourth is hijacking established terms and turning them into what I call tofu words. Tofuization, I call it. Ran, that's for you. Ran is an old friend of mine. Because Ran, I gave Ran my PowerPoint and said, what is tofu word? I said, he must be vegetarian, what am I saying against? Tofu words are words. Okay, what is tofu? Tofu is something that you can make any taste out of. You can put tofu, I'm told by vegetarians and vegans that you can take tofu, like I love stinky tofu, it's a completely different taste from the tofu you find in kind of, so tofu means that you take a term, say Zionism, you take a term, say genocide, take a term, say apartheid, and you kind of tofuize it. You change its taste according to your liking, whatever suits you best. You don't look at the established meaning. Okay, so let me just give you the first one and forget about, and this is the first one. Anachronistically ignoring the crucial difference between sense and referent. Jesus was a Palestinian, as if this Jewish rabbi had something to do with Yasser Arafat. Now, I'm going to give you some examples, because I found thousands of examples, and echoing what Melinda said earlier, if you repeat and repeat and repeat, at the end, also clever people would take it for granted. And if you say, excuse me, there is a fallacy here, then you need to explain. Now, you need to explain it linguistically, but let me give you more examples. Jesus, the most famous Palestinian. This is from posts that received hundreds of thousands of likes. It's not just like, on 24th December 2025, a billboard on Times Square in New York City claimed that Jesus is a Palestinian. The billboard was paid by the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC, and was accompanied by a Quranic verse. So obviously, Jesus is Palestinian. What they meant was he actually belonged to the Palestinian movement, as we know, Yasser Arafat, etc. However, And here is something you need to remember, please. The lexical item Palestinian has one sense, meaning deriving, or it's part of that land that some people call Palestine, some people call Israel, some people call Canaan, some people call, there are many names. But it has various reference. For sense is the literal meaning pertaining to the land of Israel, also known as Palestine. The Greek name Palestine appears in the histories by Herodotus in the 5th century BC, with the meaning of a district in Syria between Phoenicia and Egypt. So Palestine is from 2,500 years ago. Following the failed Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans, the Roman province Judea was renamed by the Romans as Syria Palestina. That was the name. So this is 500 years before Islam. Neither Palestine nor Syria Palestina have anything to do with today's so-called Palestinian people, Arafat or Hamas. On the contrary, consider Talmud Yerushalmi, which is known as Palestinian Talmud. This is how we call the Talmud Yerushalmi in English often, the Palestinian Talmud. It has nothing to do with Gaza. It is compiled between the late 4th century to the first half of the 5th century AD. It is obviously Jewish and has nothing to do with Yasser Arafat. And of course, 1939, you can see here Palestine versus Australia. And if you look at the surnames, they are not like a Sayed, but rather Zimmermann, Fuchs, Menachem, Ginsberg, Michalis, Neufeld, Werner, this is Palestine. In 1947, Help Free Palestine. Apropos, somebody told me that Manny Wax's brother, what's his name, Yemini or something? He has a party called Free Palestine. Actually, in New York, Zionist Organization of America Help Free Palestine. So this is from 1947. So it's not that many years ago. My mom's mom Stolperstein in Hamburg, and you can see Regina Teichner, gedemütigt, entrechtet, flücht 1934, Palästina. Yeah? She escaped to Palestine. Nobody with a right mind would say that my mother's mother, was a supporter of Yasser Arafat. Etc., etc. This is something I found recently. This manhole in Haifa is older than the state of Israel. It's called Government of Palestine. So people actually used it in order to show that it's Palestine, but of course it's Palestine meaning Jewish. And I could give you many other examples, but what I want you to remember is that what happens here is very simple. They took the sense and they took the referent, and actually they used one sense with a completely different referent. So, before I continue, I would like to tell you about, just that you understand what I'm talking about. In 1935, the Times published an article, John Smith, a pilot in the First World War, died of cancer. Is there anybody here who can raise his hand if he discovered something impossible about what I've just said? Just if you raise your hand, don't say, just raise your hand. Say it again? In 1935, the Times, which is a newspaper in the UK, published an article, and the article headline was John Smith, a pilot in the First World War, died of cancer. And my question is whether somebody notices that there is... What? Run.
Nobody knows. It was called the Great War.
Very good. Now, look, this is just a test. Most people would not realize that the sense is problematic. Everybody thinks about the referent, not about the sense. The sense of the First World War is the big war that included all the world, but it was the first one. That's a sense. But the referent is the war between 14 and 18. We think about the referent. You understand? when I was in Tel Aviv and I asked, excuse me, why is it called Greek salad? סליחה, למה קוראים לזה סלט יווני? She answered, אתה לא רואה שיש בזה גבינה בולגרית? Don't you see that it has Bulgarian cheese in it? Now, what she meant, for the Israelis, it sounds kind of silly, what she meant was, don't you see it has feta cheese? But feta cheese in Israeli is gvina bulgarit, which is Bulgarian cheese. But she was thinking about the referent, she was not thinking about the sense. You see, the referent and the sense are so important because sometimes it makes no sense. I mean, in both senses. Okay. I want to move on because I could talk about this for a very long time.
5 minutes.
How many? 5. The etymological fallacy. Just in case someone tells you that he cannot be anti-Semitic because he is a Semite, arguing that anti-Semitism is hatred of Arabs too is applying a fallacy known in linguistics as the etymological fallacy. Bondi attack and the rush to enact new anti-Semitism laws. By Khaled Ghanem, it is important to note that our definition of anti-Semitism encompasses tabara. While the term Semitic refers to the Semitic people who inhabited the Eastern Mediterranean and only Jews to be the Semitic people, this is despite... So you see here an article that exactly does this etymological fallacy. Now, he's not the only one. Sydney-based Sheikh Kamal Taleb speaking in December, it's impossible for an Arab to be anti-Semitic. He says that. Why? Because he is Semitic. And of course, you all know this anti-Semitic tirade by Dr. Rose Nakad. She was filmed, and Nakad labeled the group gathered as parasites and fucking filthy Zionists, continuing as Zionist, employing the etymological fallacy. She says, I am Semitic. You are not, because the other woman was probably blonde or something. You're a white woman. I'm a real Semite, so you cannot say to me that I'm anti-Semitic. This is a blatant use of the etymological fallacy. What is the etymological fallacy? It is similar to saying that every time I use the word bugger, I express racism towards Bulgarians. Apropos Bulgarian cheese. As it happens, the lexical item bugger can be traced back etymologically to the word for Bulgarian. This is truth. But to say to me that I said bugger and therefore I am anti-Bulgarian is ridiculous, because nobody should care less about the etymology. What you should care less is about the meaning. The term antisemitisch was coined by Austrian Jewish bibliographer Moritz Steinschneider. If you Google, you might not find it, because this is actually research. I mean, they might tell you it was an anti-Semitic person later. This is the truth. In 1860, so I antedated it, referring specifically to anti-Jewish beliefs and practices. So antisemitisch ab initio, from the very beginning, is used for Jew hating. So if you use the etymological fallacy, you say, oh no, it's anti and then Jewish, Semitish, I'm a Semite. This is an etymological fallacy. The etymological fallacy arises when someone argues that the meaning is not determined by the established actual use of the term, but rather by its morphology, by the structure of the word, racism against Semitic people. Now, I would like to give you another example, and then I would like to end, and we can discuss the other points later. The other 2 fallacies. So I'm only discussing today 2 fallacies out of 4 fallacies. Grace Thames' misleading exploration of the etymology of the Arabic lexical item intifada, when trying to defend her vitriolic anti-Semitic screaming, globalized the intifada that was mentioned, this sentence was mentioned by Melinda. Grace Thames says, disingenuously distorting definitions has been a cornerstone of Israel's propaganda strategy for decades. This is verbatim, I'm just telling you exactly what she said. Choosing to put a negative spin on the word intifada, which literally means shaking off, is another example of that. End of quote. So she defends herself by saying that intifada means shaking off. as if she's like an Arabic linguist or philologist. The Arabic verbal noun intifada can indeed be traced back to the reflexive verb intafada, which is based on the triconsonantal root nafada, with a da, shake off or dust off, making something shiva. But this ultimate etymology has very little to do with the current meaning of intifada. The actual meaning of intifada, as used by native Arabic speakers too, not only by English speakers, is rebellion, uprising, resistance movement. Furthermore, Australians know the lexical item not because of shaking off camels. It used to refer to camels, shaking off camels, intifada, but rather due to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where intifada refers to the Palestinian uprising against Israel that involves violent methods of resistance, including the first intifada, I remember because I was in the Israeli army there, and the second intifada. Grace Staines playing innocent is disgraceful and untamed. Please forgive my puns. Accusing Jews of putting a negative spin on the word intifada is itself a spin. Tame acts naive to evade responsibility by employing a linguistic fallacy which is well established. Nobody has mentioned it in the news. Nobody. I have looked at all, at that time. I mean, you might say, why did you not go to, etymological fallacy and ignoring the established meaning of intifada. The actual meaning of globalizing intifada is not an international shaking by camels, but rather do in Australia what you do in Israel. And this is exactly what happened on the 14th of December 2025, Bondi. The ultimate etymology of intifada has very little to do with its current meaning. Okay, go on. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gilad. There will be time, by the way, after the Q&A. We've got snacks out the back, and for those that are able to hang around for a little bit, I'm sure the speakers will also take questions from you. But moving along, our final panel speaker today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Run Porat. Run is an affiliate research associate at the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization at Monash University. He's a university lecturer and analyst on Israel and Middle Eastern affairs, an expert on extremism in the Australian Arab Muslim community and on the Israeli diaspora in Australia. He's also a research associate at AJAC, the Australian Israel Jewish Affairs Council, and a research fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at the Reichman University in Herzliya. His research interests include history, ethnography, immigration, Israel studies, diaspora, Middle East studies, conflict, post-conflict issues, Iranian nuclear program, radicalisation and extremism, Jewish studies, propaganda, anti-Westernism, and conspiracy theories. That doesn't leave much out, does it?
I also do a nice pasta, so.
Good to know. Vegetarian. Thanks, Run.
I'll be quick. I'll do the two things that Jews don't do. I'll be on time and I'll speak to the point. As my mentor, Professor Andrew Marcus, used to say, I'm honored to be with these two towering figures, Melinda and Gilad. I'm not just talking about their height, because I'm much smaller than them, but also their academic record and all that's very impressive, and I'm grateful to be here. Gilad gave Melinda set the platform, what is Antisemitism? I want to first, before I go into my lecture about one of the original anti-Zionists, Khalil Sakatini, give you an example of my experience of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in my university in Monash. So I was teaching the Arab-Israeli conflict course since 2011, non-stop, until October 7th. And after October 7th, my bosses were called to the management, and they were told I could not teach that anymore. So they kind of tried to advance or progress or tell them I'm okay and everything. So it was agreed that I could teach that if I have a chaperone, a non-Jewish chaperone in class, Christian. And even after that, I said I'm not willing to do so, but eventually I said okay. But then they decided no, block you altogether. You can teach, out of 12 classes, you can teach only 4 classes, and with you, you have to have a Muslim class. So I ended up teaching 4 classes out of 12 with a very nice guy that you know, which I found very fair, Walid Ali. You know Walid Ali from TV? Yeah. He's very nice. And that's one. I have other examples, but the other example is I'm part of the project called Mira. It's about research of anti-Semitism. I built a database of thousands of cases of anti-Semitism in Australian universities, and I was invited to participate in the Monash project about social cohesion on campus. Jews and Arabs together, Jews and Muslims, together. And a day before I was about to participate in the sort of the opening night, I got a phone call from a Monash official, never mind the names, telling me don't go because it's going to create problems for the other side. I was blocked from that project because I'm an Israeli. So these are just 2 examples. I was also targeted online and other things. I know what Antizionism is on the flesh. On October 7th, I was teaching class, actually October 10th, and I was talking to the students. I was teaching about modern Middle East, and one of the Muslim students told me, you know, it's horrible what happened, but it's the kids at Nova are also at fault because they were partying next to the biggest jail on earth. So you can see the same fallacies. And I didn't know what to do. I said, you know, you're entitled to your own opinion, but I beg to differ. But let's talk about the origins of that, and I'll try to keep to my time. Khalil Sakakini is really another towering figure. Born in the late 19th century, an educator, a humanist. I watched this 26 minutes video about him that was produced just this year in Televisión El Arabi, the Arab TV. Very impressive, very interesting. But they don't mention one aspect of his life, his support of Nazism. He's a hero, there's street names after him, he's very famous. Khalil Sakakini, Sakin is right, is knife. Sakakini is like, Sakakin is the plural knife. Yeah. You know, my knife, Sakakini, my knives. So many aspects of him is Arab nationalist, very important one. The Nahda is what do you call that? When you reconstruct, sort of Renaissance, right? Renaissance. A patriot, an Arab nationalist, a pan-Arabist, and so on. I'll give you some points about his life, and then we'll go into his anti-Zionism. So he was a teacher, he was a poet, he wrote wonderful poems to his beloved wife when he was trying to get to marry her. He had to go to America to find the money because the family wouldn't let him. He was a Christian. He founded schools. One of them is the Dustoria. Dustoria is constitution. And he was the inspector of schools during the British Mandate, 1918 to 1948. A member of all these national movements and so on. Very impressive guy. In his schools, he was somebody who broke the way to many innovative ideas about education, no punishments, emphasis on PE, athletics. That was not before that was accepted. Music, first name basis between the teacher and sort of like my daughter's school here at Templeton College. He was beloved by his students. He had Jewish students. He tutored Jewish students. So on a personal level, he was really a humanist. He also was a nationalist. So, for example, when there were several Arab revolts, but one of them was against the French mandate in Syria in the early 1920s. Never mind. He created their national anthem of that rebellion. He was really supportive of what he saw as Palestine, the great under sort of auspices of a national state that encompasses Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. This great Arab kind of idea, which is not new, it's Syria al-Kubra, and so forth. A very impressive guy, very admired, and a towering figure. This is his what it says on his business card. Khalil Sakakini, in San, I can't see because I didn't bring my glasses. Ibn Allah, meaning first of all a person or a humanist or a man. Okay, and he said he spoke highly about the values of what is in our culture, to be hospitable and to respect others, and every human is entitled for independence. He knew Greek philosophy. He went to America to work to get some money to marry his wife. He was a great father. He had 3 kids. One of them passed away in the early 50s, and he was heartbroken and died of a heart attack soon after in Egypt. So a very impressive guy, admired. But his humanism stops when it comes to the Zionist movement. Now, he was one of the early persons to actually encounter Zionism on the ground. So he lived, of course, he grew up in Jerusalem. He moved between Syria and Haifa and other places. And he had students that were, he tutored Jewish students that were Zionists, and he had conversations with them. He wrote about this in his diaries. He had written several books. And he immediately saw Zionism as a great threat. Immediately saw it as something threatening and scary. When, for instance, when the British Mandate began and there was a radio, when the announcer was saying in Hebrew, Eretz Israel, Khalil Sakakini was supposed to be the Arabic announcer, resigned. As soon as he heard that Herbert Samuel was the first High Commissioner to the British Mandate, was a Jew and a Zionist, as soon as he heard that he nominated, he resigned from his role as the teacher's sort of High Commissioner, superintendent, and so on. And I'm going to show some of the arguments he put forward in his documents and his diaries, and you can see how they're familiar. Here's an example from his diary. This is 1914, the beginning of the First World War, or the Great War. Before the Balfour Declaration, which I remind you is 1917, Zionism was at its infancy. Only a few thousand Jews in Israel, or later Israel, Ottoman Palestine. And he says in his diary, if I hate the Zionist movement, it's only because it is building its existence and its independence on the ruins of others. I'm not opposed to the Jewish nation's striving for its independent existence. To the contrary, I commend every dispersed and depressed nation to steer itself and become free. But I oppose the precedent, yeah? You said that, on which the movement arose, which was to bring down another in order for it to hold its head high, to destroy an entire nation in order to live. Now, if that sounds familiar, here's an example of how it was repeated by Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO in 1974, in his famous 1974 UN address, where he started with I have an olive branch in my hand, I have a gun in my other hand, which he didn't. They took away his gun and left him with his holster. Don't let the olive branch fall off my hand. 3 times he said that. But here's what he said in his speech. Zionism is an ideology that is imperialist, what Melinda said, yeah? Colonialist, racist. It is organic to the concept of settler colonialism, which thrives only through the uprooting and displacement of the native inhabitants of the land. It's the same argument, built on the ruins of others. This is 60 years afterwards. Sakakini is the first one to put them forward. Here's another example. If I had Zionism, again, in his diary, this is 1914, I do not do so because I'm opposed to the Jewish nation's revival and escape from the pit of misery. No, he's not bad. He supports the right. But because I hate the you say the word, upon which the Zionist movement stands, it tries to build its nationhood on the ruins of others. Because conquering Palestine is like conquering the heart of the Arab nation. Since Palestine is the link connecting the Arabian Peninsula to Egypt and Africa. Sounds familiar? Our friend, the late Ali Khamenei, in 2012, the supreme leader of Iran, yeah, The great powers have dominated the destiny of the Islamic countries for years and installed the Zionist cancerous tumor in the heart of the Islamic world. The same argument 100 years later. Now he had a student, as I said, the Zionist student named Mr. Ivri, and this is what they had discussion. This is what Sakakini tells him. If you ask the Arabs, by what right do you occupy this land? The Arabs would say, this is a natural part of the lands of Arabia. And if this land is the birthplace of your spirituality and the homeland of your chronicles, and for the Arabs there is another claim that is irreproachable, that they filled it with their language and their culture. Your claim, meaning the Jewish claim, died in the course of time. And our claim is alive and well. Meaning Jewish claims are dead. And here, you possibly know that. Here's, for example, the Palestinian National Charter in 1968. Claims of the historical or religious ties of Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history and the true conception of what constitutes statehood, and so on and so on and so on. So what I'm telling you is this. From the very first moment, the encounter between Arabs, and he was a Christian, not a Muslim, between Arabs and the Zionists created those repeating lies that we see later on. And there's another layer to that. On top of it, because he so objects so fiercely to that thing, he adds the justification, what Melinda was pointing to why violence against that movement is okay. Here is this humanist. He supported the Palestinian uprising against the British and Jewish peasants, that's in 1936 to 1939. He praised the grenade attack on Jewish civilian train, called the attackers heroes. There was an attack in 1936 against the Edison cinema where 3 Jews were killed. He compared the perpetrators to the terrorists in a positive way, Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam, that famous terrorist in the 20s from the Haifa region that later became, the Hamas named their brigades after him. He worried that violence looked bad because Jews controlled the newspaper and radio. Sounds familiar? The same cesspool of anti-Semitic conspiracies and hatred is used immediately, from day one. And I'm thinking about, you talk about the pool of languages, they talk about the cesspool of anti-Semitic ideas. And he says, bomb and shoot the British and Jewish invaders, torch Jewish fields and orange groves, ambush routine traffic, block roads, and derail trains, cut power lines. It's okay. Violence is fine. And he knew exactly what Nazism was. He wrote to his son that Hitler is a problem. He put together Lenin and Mussolini and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the Turkish leader, as a modern prophet, false prophets. But, like many Arab Palestinians during World War II, he supported Nazis. He believed Nazi Germany would liberate Palestine from the Jew by weakening Britain. He influenced, his friend was Haj Amin Husseini, you all know that name, the Mufti of Jerusalem, who actually went to Germany, met Hitler, created Muslim brigades in Bosnia and so on. He supported General Rommel's advance in Africa. He said Adolf Hitler opened the world's eyes to the Jewish world power. No, he doesn't see the contradiction between humanism and his compassion towards humans and what he thinks should be done to Jews if they're Zionists or Jews in general, and so on. When the Struma, which was a ship that was carrying Holocaust refugees after the Holocaust, or during the Holocaust, actually drowned, he said it's not that bad because they were invaders. By the way, Palestine is related to Kleshet, Miflosh, to invade. Yes, okay. Holocaust, he said, was exploited parasitically. Yeah, did I say the word correctly? By Jews demanding a homeland in Palestine. It's the same arguments you hear again and again. Jews weaponized the Holocaust. Have you heard that? Yes. And Jews' right to vote should be revoked due to Jewish influence. You can allow Jews to come to Palestine during the mandate only if they're old to die there, not if they want to create a thriving environment. And there is the anti-Zionists like to talk about pinkwashing, whitewashing, all these other stories. There is a great whitewashing over Sakakini, like the movie that never mentions that. his relations to the Nazism and his support of violence. You look at the encyclopedia, there's nothing about him. There's all these wonderful words about him. I won't go into that, you can know what to read. At the same time, on a human level, again, he was a humanist. When Alter Levin, who was a Jew with an American citizenship, fled to his house in 1917 as the Ottomans were chasing him because they were trying to arrest any American citizens during World War I. He hid him in his house until he was captured, taken to Damascus, and was there for 40 days in jail. So he protected him, and he said, "This is my right. This is my obligation as a human." So he doesn't see the contradiction. Individual Jews, good Jews, as Melinda said, are okay. But if they're a group and they want rights, that's it. So I'll finish with this. So this all moves through time. There's new influences going in. There's communist propaganda. There's Arab propaganda. There's Nazi propaganda. All that get mixed, and we have that new version of anti-Zionism, the green-red alliance between socialists, communists, and the Islamists. And the new version is what Anat Wilf calls Palestinianism. Thank you. What Gilad said. Which is, the core of it is not the arguments. The core of it is not that the Palestinians want a state. It's that they refuse to give the Jews a state. And I asked myself, you can watch the video later, but never mind that, because he says the same thing. And I asked myself one last, I'll finish with that. Why Sakakini, from day one, already so aggressive and violent against Zionism? And my answer could only be anxiety and fear. And that anxiety and fear is not only because he understands the relative power imbalance, that from his perspective, the Arabs, the Muslims, or whatever, they cannot stand this Jewish might, Jewish power, but because he views Jewish might and power based on his anti-Semitic views, anti-Semitic perceptions of what Jews are. This demon, this great powerful monster. So next time you think about anti-Zionism, think about Sakakini. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Now what we'll do is we're actually just going to give Melinda, Gilad and Run the opportunity to make a comment, if they would like, in response to their co-presenters. Would someone like to start? Yeah.
So I will just ask one question to Run. It's okay? Firstly, thank you so much, Melinda and Run. It was wonderful listening to you. When I listened to your presentation about Sakakini, I was thinking about woke, because in a way, wokeists hate racists and Jews. So Sakakini for me is it's very similar to what I encounter more and more. People who are humanists, for example, supporting LGBT rights, which is wonderful, and supporting Muslim minorities who are suffering, which is one, the Uyghur, yeah, you're right, but with only one blind spot, which explains all the cliches like queers for Palestine. But my question to you is, but on the other hand, he had the right, because he was, wokeists that I see are usually not even Muslim, not even Palestinian, they're just like white fellows or whatever. Whereas he was kind of there, so he was a wokeist with a good reason, you know what I mean? Like, how would you analyze this wokeism vis-a-vis Sakakinism, or I mean, is this a blind spot that he had, or he had just his own agenda against, the people who came to where he lived? So,
I'll be very brief, but I want to tell you something, Linda. Your great late brother, Jeremy Jones, which I had the honor of working with, used to say the difference between, we used to bring him these articles, right? The difference between an article that I liked and the one that I didn't like is, an article I liked, I labeled analysis. An article I didn't like, I labeled opinion. So Sakakini was analyzing the situation around him, and then he created an opinion, right? He was not wrong to foresee that these Jews have a purpose, have a mechanism, have a strong ideology, have a historical connection, and that the Arabs are in disarray, they're dysfunctional and all that. He was not right. What he was wrong about, I don't know if he was woke. I would not buy that definition, but I think what he was wrong about is that he misjudged, and that is a Palestinian tragedy ongoing, that you should not, the way to face this danger is to interact, is to engage. And I invite everybody, because you mentioned, I'll finish with that. You mentioned that student at the Catholic College. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what is missing is give tools to people how to interact positively with different opinions. And I recommend the book, A Brave Conversation by another one of my bosses, Dr. Daniel Heller, how to do that. So I'm not worried about wokes. I'm worried about we as Jews afraid of engaging with a Palestinian flag or a kafir. I'm not afraid. Let's talk about it.
It's been a wonderfully interesting and diverse discussion. And what I wanted to draw attention to was the picture, particularly of Jesus as a Palestinian. I love those pictures. You look at them and say, really? And one of the things I'm concerned about outcomes and resolving problems and what we can do about the issue. That's my driving force as a human rights lawyer. And I've been thinking, what can you do about the fact that everybody thinks that Jesus was a Palestinian and he spoke Arabic well before the language existed. And I was wondering whether part of our problem is we need to sort of think a bit laterally. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be good if there was a unit at school about Jesus as a Palestinian in all the studies of religion courses? Because you could discuss so many interesting things, the way history works, the way language works, what the history of the region was, what impact that had on religion. And I think that would do a great thing, but nobody would sort of say, and this is part of our challenge, people don't say it's anti-Semitic to say Jesus was a Palestinian. But it's part of the whole ideological environment, the ambient environment of anti-Semitism, where you have incorrect information being fed that has the ongoing effect of saying, well, the Jews killed Palestinians even way back then. See, they were our enemies from before we existed. That was very clever of them.
yeah, I would like just to say one thing that I didn't mention in my talk, but it was mentioned, I think, in the title of my talk. Deicide, the killing of God, is what Jews have been accused of by Christians. It's called deicide, D-E-I-C-I-D-E, like deicide, so killing of Dei, which is God. I argue, I predict, and you might say it's stupid to predict, especially the future, but I predict that we Jews will be accused in the future of DEI side, so of killing diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I think it would be a good thing if we were.
And I think that we will be accused of DEI side or DEI side or whatever you want to say, which is pronounced the same as DEI side, written the same, DEI side, because diversity, equity, and inclusion currently is what I use woke. I know many people don't like using this term, but I like it. And woke means that diversity, equity, and inclusion, you will appoint somebody who is dark, as say professor at Cambridge or my university just because he's dark, or you would appoint, there was Margaret Shields, she's a professor at QUT, and she said several years ago that we should never have merit as part of appointments at Australian universities. You can Google it. We should only have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because DEI often hate Jews for various reasons, maybe because Israel contradicts the usual. So look, people say, why do we not have protests against Iran, the Iranian regime in Australia? And many people say, oh, no Jews, no news. I don't think that this is the only reason. I think there is another reason. Of course, no Jews, no news is a good reason, but there is another reason. The other reason is that what happens in Iran contradicts the narrative of woke. The narrative of woke, you have the white...
Sorry.
Is it mine?
No, that was mine.
Okay. You have the white colonialists who go to the miserable Muslim people. That's the narrative, that's the discourse. In Iran, it's not that, because you have Muslims against Muslims. It doesn't follow the narrative of woke. Now, this has nothing to do with no Jews, no news. Of course, no Jews. So what I'm trying to say is that is related to that.
Just I'll finish with two sentences. First of all, Mahmoud Darwish, the great poet, and famously said, the only reason they talk about the Palestinian issue is because we are your enemies. So it's our luck and our misfortune that you are our enemies. And I was thinking if you could comment about two things. One, I sent you a news item that said, from a lefty, saying something like the survivors of the flotilla. You know, the flotilla that was captured and was, Ben Gvir came and did his Shukuni Anas, yeah, look at me people. So survival, that's also, if you can comment about that. But the other point is anti-Palestinianism. Is it a reversal of anti-Semitism? Is it the same linguistic maneuver that is,
One thing in language is echoing. Echoing is a very clever rhetorical device. So whenever people talk about axis of evil, for example, they echo some Christian, and whenever they say, for example, Mi Yamalel Gvurot Israel, like what we have in Hanukkah, we sing not who will, originally, Mi Yamalel Gvurot Yahweh. The original sentence is who will glorify the mighty deeds of Yahweh. Yahweh means God. And often pronounced differently, not Yahweh, but the original pronunciation was Yahweh. What in Israel we do is a Mi Yamalel Gvurot Israel. So we replace God by Israel. This is echoing because it says to us that Israel, the state of Israel, is as holy as God. So this is called echoing. So what you talk, the survivors of the flotilla, is exactly the survivors. As if it's like struma. Struma, yeah. So the survivor. It was their choice. It was funnily enough. But then we will let Karen give the microphone to the audience. In 1945, there were ships. There was a ship from Europe going to Israel, escaping after the Holocaust, escaping Europe. And on the way, there was a ship going from Israel to Europe, escaping the problems of Israel, because there were many problems. And they say that the ones from Europe, they shouted, they saw that there are Jews going to Europe, and they said, Meshiganers, Meshugaim, and crazy people. And the ones from Israel, they said, Meshiganers. So both were shouting, crazy, mad people. Now, why am I reminded of that? Because I have friends from Australia who are going to Israel, who are moving to Israel. In fact, one of them is here. Tali is a mathematician at Monash. And I have and I have friends from Israel moving to Australia. And both are shouting, Meshugaim, like idiots. Like some people ask me, should I go to Australia? I'm afraid of snakes. I said, no, snakes are nothing. I mean, there are many other.
Or as my mother says, aren't you afraid of anti-Semitism in Australia? I said, yeah, but nobody shoots rockets at me. So.
Well, the question is going to be 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, because as the ideology, if the ideology is not stopped, then we are in trouble. Not just we as Jews, but the Australian democracy is at risk. And the easiest way to see what level of risk it is to see what level of risk is being directed at Jews. Because if it can be directed at Jews, it can be directed at everybody else. It's not the canary in the coal mine. We're not calling out that this is that future. It is said by the Palestinians that they want to destroy the West. They're not only directing their animus at us, and yet we might be the ones who might be the bulwark, if we're lucky enough, that we can potentially stop the destruction of our community.
Thank you. Now we'll open it to the floor, and we're also going to open it to for questions for people who are on Zoom. Are we right, David, to bring them up? In a moment they'll come up on the screen. But we'll start with a couple of questions from the audience. Please ask a question to the microphone so that people on Zoom can hear.
Hi, thank you. Two questions, I think, to Melinda. So first of all, the story that you gave of your colleague from the peace group, I mean, it just made me think, that was probably somebody who pre-October 7th would have been appalled at the thought that she was an anti-Semite. So kind of what do you think is the kind of the mental process that people are going through? What's going on there? Is everybody just sort of a latent anti-Semite, or is there, what is actually going on there, do you think? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, where do you put the discourse, which we may not agree with, but it's a legitimate discourse, in Israel it exists, that says there should just be one state. It should be just one state, one democratic state. We're not talking about pushing the Jews into the sea, but we're just saying that all the people, we could say from the river to the sea, should have equal rights, and it should be just one nation. And, there are Jewish Israelis that support that stand. Actually, not many, but there are some. And they may call themselves anti-Zionist, I don't know, but where do you place that?
Thank you. I've already forgotten what the first question was. That's good. About Lord Miller. Look, I don't think that most Australians hate Jews. I don't think most Australians have an inkling that what they're doing is anti-Semitism. I think they've caught up, and the reason I think if we think of anti-Zionism and then a lot of anti-Semitism as ideology, I think we can see that it's something that you sort of get trapped into it. It just becomes your way of seeing things without reflecting. Most people don't reflect about what they say. That's why I think that if we have teaching units that go to all the schools and say Jews are good people, and they go to Shul on Yom Kippur and they speak Hebrew, I don't think that's going to do anything for social harmony. But if we had classes on whether Jesus was a Palestinian, it might do something for social harmony. You've got a different sort of framing of what you're trying to do. I think that we do sometimes see people changing their tune after a while, beginning to understand what's going on. And I think that's about talking. I think conversations are incredibly important. My problem has generally been that people don't want to talk to me rather than I don't want to talk to them. It's quite hard. Like the interfaith, a lot of the formal interfaith work in the community, I used to be involved in a national dialogue for Christians, Muslims and Jews. It was a government-appointed position, and on October 7th, why would an interfaith thing? So, and when it goes to...
Was that the JCMA?
No. The JCMA, I'm not sure what's happened to that. Did they? Yeah, well, we basically couldn't have... Muslim people would not participate with Jews. So they wouldn't have the conversations. So part of the challenge is to get other people to talk to us as well as the other way around. As to the issue about conversations about hard questions, because that's what you've raised, I suppose I'd say two things. First of all, I think we have to really be clear that anti-Semitism and treatment of Jews has nothing to do with an argument about which way we want to see the future of Israel. They're completely separate questions, and they have to be kept separate, because anti-Zionism as an ideology attributes things to Jews, attributes characteristics to Jews, and that's the thing that's so important. That's what we need to change, that attribution. The reason the way I would respond is in a personal capacity to the issue that you raised is that at the end of the day, any state's going to have an authority. And the question is, what's the nature of the authority? Every country in the world has some religious authority. Some, for example, are you going to declare in the Israel where everyone's equal, it's a public holiday on Friday, Saturday and Sunday because all religions can have days off? I mean, you'd get to the point where you couldn't have run an economy because you'd be making these decisions.
Well, universal basic income. So.
Oh, yes, so
UBI.
yeah.
UBI, nobody has to work.
So there are a whole lot of infrastructure questions, but the questions to me would be, is there any chance that there would be an infrastructure that protected Jewish practice if the dominance was by... Because demographically, there will be more Arabs than Jews in the land, if that's what you say. If you know it just becomes a free place where everybody can live and anything can pass through. I think they said in 20 years, or maybe it's really as many as 20 years, that the population changed. So it depends on whether, A, you think there's value in the Jewish state in its own right, as a separate entity, which you might not do, and that's perfectly legitimate point of view. Or you might think that it's absolutely essential we have a Jewish state. You might even think that we don't have any Arabs there. And that's a legitimate point of view. As long as you're not killing people and challenging their ability to participate in society. The bottom line is, we need to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And you don't treat people with dignity and respect by accusing them of being racist and genocidal and all those things. You do treat people with respect by saying, this is something, you and I might sit down now and have an hour's conversation and completely disagree with each other. That's fine. But it might not be fine if I want an outcome. And I'm trying to put an outcome. That's just where the problems might lie. I hope that sounds fair.
I just want to ask you a question, and then I will give you. What would you give Hamas in the government of will you give them the education ministry or the defense ministry? Because you will have some. I'm not saying most people, of course, will not vote. I'm optimistic, but what kind of ministry? What kind of would you give Hamas? Maybe the religion means. By the way, I'm echoing here questions that people ask. What are you going to give Ben Gvir? What are you? The same.
Good point. Okay, let's have one more from the audience and then we will pass it to someone on Zoom. Can I just ask speakers, make sure you hold the mic like I am right up here because it's coming in and out for the people on Zoom if you don't hold the microphone close.
Thank you. Good to see you. Two questions to Melinda and Gilad. Sorry, Ron. But, you talk about the semantic anti-Semitism and how it's kind of ingrained. And Melinda, you talk about how most Australians aren't necessarily haters of Jews. They don't even realize what they're doing. And then it's a matter of, sitting down and talking, and yet you say most people won't talk to you. And so I know that right after October 7th, people said, oh, too soon. And you talk about no one wants to do this. So how do you breach that? How do you breach the fact that there are now all of these things floating around in society, these myths, your idea of having this, Jesus was a Palestinian is a great idea. How do we get people, we think it's great because we think, oh, well, obviously you'll see fact is not necessarily true and dissecting it, but there are also so many people that are so blind, you can literally put the facts in front of them. You can show them a black piece of paper and they'll say, no, it's white. And so, it's an interesting question as to how do you bridge that now? What would you do? Or what are you doing?
I was thinking about the second one, so I forgot what the first one was. But the thing is, I might be foolish, but I actually have faith that people are capable of critical thinking. And I think that any education system is responsible for teaching critical thinking. And I would hate to think that people can't separate out fact from fiction when appropriately taught how to make those decisions.
And if university professors sign the job who are trained and teach others in critical thinking, it makes that enough with articulating this information.
Yes, it's very, very sad. I used to believe universities were places of intellect and higher learning. I haven't been there for a while, so I know they've changed in that period of time. It's impossible. You cannot, look, if you're going to try and teach property law, and you have got not an intellectual, critical perspective, you can't do it. You can't understand it yourself. It's unbelievably complex. So if these sorts of things like a legal profession is going to continue, we're going to have to somehow continue to teach people, even if there are a whole lot of outliers. When it comes to the to who to talk to, and I said that I've lost friends, and we've all said we've lost friends. One of the things is, there are two groups of people that we're talking about. One of the sort of extremists, the people who go into town and protest, or would think about going into town and protest, and all the people who've been convinced by DEI and other such places, other such programs. But there's the vast majority of people who don't actually have a clue what it's all about, right? If you speak to some people, they don't even know that this is going on. Our full-time activity is knowing about what's going on in Israel, what's going on with anti-Semitism, and people are watching the Royal Commission full-time, but they're all Jews, right? The rest of the people in the country aren't doing that. So we've got lots and lots of people. All the kids at school, unless they've come from an anti-Semitic background, are not inherently anti-Semitic. I think that there is lots and lots of possibility with Australians, but you have to have the right program. I'm very worried that the education programs that people are talking about are going to avoid the hard questions. So we'll say, this is what Jews do, but we won't talk about why do people hate Jews, or what are we going to do about these sorts of environmental things if they're still around. What bits of the anti-Semitism are we going to approach? We need to know the things Gilad spoke about and that Ran spoke about in terms of these things are happening, fact, fact, fact. What are we doing? And I think there is potential, but it's just because although I feel incredibly pessimistic most of the time, 1% of me is an optimist.
Thank you. You've mentioned, so I would like to echo what Melinda said. Oscar Wilde wrote about ignorance. Ignorance is like a delicate, exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom is gone. And sometimes ignorance, there are days in which, each of us thinks, oh, the entire people are just fuckwits, but there are days in which we are very charitable and very optimistic. And I personally believe, and this is why I like LBC, if I understand correctly, in the kindness of people in general. So, but of course I understand what brainwashing is and what it does. It's a very powerful thing. But to say, look, we cannot influence kids who come from specific background, and therefore it's a lost cause, is not something that I do. I think that if you explain, for example, my DNA test. So I have a DNA test that shows that I'm a Kohen, I'm a priest. And I knew that because my father told me, although I'm a Zuckerman, I'm not Kohen, but we are Kohanim. And it goes back to Israel. So my DNA test shows you how I'm from Israel. So I was in Israel, so my DNA is in Israel. And by the way, you can read Karl Skoretsky. He's a famous geneticist about DNA from it. So whatever you want it or not, I am actually from that land. So I'm talking now to the other side, you wokist, if you want to talk about my situation, at least regard me as an old indigenous person to the land of Israel, because this is a fact. I can show you something that some alleged Aboriginals cannot. There are some people in Australia who are allegedly Aboriginal, but they cannot show you a DNA test that can prove it. I can show you my indigeneity. And this is a fact. Now, this is the fact. So I believe that if I show it, by the way, I showed it to somebody in Adelaide, they couldn't believe it. They thought I was completely a colonizer who came to, seriously, because my father was born in Italy, he was a Holocaust survivor, etc., etc. So I do believe, echoing Melinda, that there is, we cannot just say, look, I mean, it's lost. And no, we need to educate. This is what education is about. Run.
No, I wasn't asked, but I would like to comment just one thing. The whole discussion here is obsolete, I'm sorry. Because we should look at the next generation. Like, for instance, I asked my daughter something. She said, my AI will talk to your AI. The humans are leaving the equation. And what we should teach our children, this generation that we are facing now in the streets and media, is sort of lost. There's no conversation with most of these people. There's no conversation. You cannot persuade them. The only way is to teach the younger generations, and what we should teach them now is not knowledge, because knowledge is at their fingertips. We should teach them how to ask questions. We should teach them how to be critical thinkers. That is the mission. And if they can ask the question, really, Jesus was Palestinian, then we can have a generation that is open for discussion. I think those generations that are, and by the way, the question of time, I'm always remember that famous cliche, tragedy plus time equals humor. Yeah. And one comedian said, why wait? Why wait?
Why wait?
So this generation, I think, I'm sad to say, is sort of lost.
Okay, we're going to attempt to throw over to a question on Zoom. Helen, if you can hear me, does Helen need to unmute herself, Dave? Yeah, you'll need to unmute yourself so you can ask the question. Let's just give it a chance to see if it works.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can, thanks Helen. Take it away.
Hey, Gilad, hi, nice to see you.
Off you go with your question.
My question is sort of political and religious at the same time. What was your response, or what has been your response to our current government recognizing a Palestinian state, taking into account what the Palestinians have been offered and refused, and the current situation of the attacks on Israel?
It's the greatest thing that happened, because it took away one of the basic demands of the Palestinians to recognize their state. Now, once we ticked that box, now the questions start to arise. Where is that state? What are their borders? Who is going to run it? Who's going to govern it? And when you start to look at these questions, the Palestinians have only question marks. They don't have answers. The only way there's going to be an answer is by engagement with Israel. I'm not talking about the Israeli side. There are issues there. Okay, let's not go into that. It was also a losing battle that the Israeli government was managing or trying to conduct in stopping that flood of countries recognizing. So they recognize Palestine. Yes, there are legal implications for that. There are other implications. Israel will be, but the problem is not that. The problem is a lack of vision. It's both sides. Lack of vision. How do you solve that problem that started 150 years ago? What is the solution?
23 states.
What?
23 states.
Okay, that's one solution. Some sides disagree with that. What is the solution? That is the big question. So they recognize Narnia. Okay. What does it mean?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks for the response. Okay, we're going to hand it over now to, because cognizant of the time. It's 8:21. So we're now... Sorry? All good? We're going to hand it now over to Ayal, who's going to address everyone, and he probably has a question of his own, and then will give us some closing remarks. So Ayal, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Karen. Just to touch on Helen's question, if we accept the premise of what Ran was quoting, Einat Wilf, about the question of Palestinians' attitude, she was one of the poster women of the Oslo Accord and the peace movement advocating for a Palestinian state. But part of her awakening over the last decade or so was the realization that, as Ran was quoting, that more than they want to have their own state, they don't want us to have one. So as long as the decision makers and the leadership and the mainstream in this society has this mindset, I can't see how we can move forward towards this horizon. Doesn't mean we don't have to aspire for it, but it's a serious obstacle that we need to find how to overcome. I would like to ask a question to all the panelists, please. As you all touched on one way or another, about that a lot of the delegitimization campaign against Israel is using legalistic language aimed at undermining the moral legitimacy of Israel. Genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, colonialism. Natasha Hasdorf, who is coming to Australia for JNF in September, was quoted in an article in the Jewish News on July 24th, saying that it is on each of us to educate ourselves, to arm ourselves with ammunition, to push back on the falsehoods, to fight for the truth, the facts on the ground, and reality under international law. My question for each of our panelists is, if there is one takeaway from your session today that you would like the participants to take home in 1 or 2 minutes, please, just because of timing, so sharp and short. Can you please share practical tools that will help us in our interaction and conversations when facing anti-Zionism? What would that be?
Okay, I think that means maximum 2 minutes each for this.
I do have a solution to the problem of anti-Semitism. No one will believe me, but I'll tell you briefly. Do you remember the smoking campaigns, the anti-smoking campaigns, the drink driving campaign, the AIDS campaign, slip, slap, slop? All of these campaigns have been incredibly successful in Australia in changing social norms, getting people to think smoking was good and changing their minds to thinking smoking was bad. Changing behaviour, changing attitudes, changing beliefs about certain activities. Research has been done into those campaigns, and I can tell you what they've said needs to be done if you want to have a successful campaign. And I don't see any reason why there could not be a successful campaign about anti-Semitism. Because what you have to do, and the very first thing you have to do, is you have to have full and complete recognition of the problem. If we come away from the Royal Commission and they define anti-Semitism as half the things that are anti-Semitism, and they don't notice all the other things, then we can't fix the problem. So on one level, definition is the most important thing. We need to be able to really name anti-Semitism when we see it. All of us need to be able to name anti-Semitism. To the Royal Commission, I told a story, and I said, this is the weirdest thing I can imagine to say is anti-Semitism, but it's part of the atmosphere here. I talked about how I was at Peter Mac Hospital, and there was this woman wandering around with a hijab, with a lanyard on, looking very officious. I didn't know who I was going to see that day. I was very, very vulnerable. I'd had a diagnosis of breast cancer. I was on my own, and this woman was wandering around, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to use my coffee? Luckily, I've got a coffee, I think. I'm going to throw it in her face if she comes near me. I thought that I was going to be sick. And what am I going to do if she turns out to be the doctor I'm seeing? Now, it turned out that she wasn't the doctor I was seeing, and she was probably a perfectly nice person. But I shouldn't have to feel so scared in my own house. Australia's my house. I shouldn't have to feel scared. And all these incidents that are happening that are ridiculous, the things that Gilad and Ran talked about are ridiculous. So first of all, we have to make sure everyone knows what is and what is not anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism is not criticism of Israel. It's got nothing to do with free speech. And I've written books on free speech. Okay, it's nothing to do with free speech. It's a misnomer. People are playing a game. Okay, it's an ideology, as I've said, I made up tonight, and I think it works. And I'm going to play with it for a while and see if it works. So, first of all, you have to recognise the problem. Second thing you have to do is you have to call out the problem. You have to say, this is bad, this is unacceptable behaviour, this is no good. Every government agency, every school, every institution of the state has to do that. You do things like, and then there's a number of other steps, but those are the most important two, but you do things like have laws that say that the employer is responsible for anti-Semitism in the workplace. We're not going to send people to prison. It's a waste of time and money sending people to prison for these things, right? We can have much better strategic ways of managing it, as they did with smoking. There are some laws where ultimately you could end up in prison, you know, if you kept on flouting and smoking outside the building or whatever it is. But nobody ever uses those laws. They were unnecessary because the values changed. We have got people to say, Jews are this, anti-Zionism is this, and we need to change round that perception. What is a Jew? And what the ideology of anti-Zionism says a Jew is, or anti-Semitism. It can be fixed.
Only 1 minute, okay. I would... so it goes like... So I would take home two things. Firstly, Zionism is the belief that Jews should be allowed in part of ancient Israel. Zionism is not for Jews to have the entire ancient Israel, and therefore if you're anti-Zionist, you're actually against Jews' existence as a self-determined entity in part of Israel. So I would argue that 95% of Jews are ipso facto Zionists. So if you're anti-Zionist, you are against 95% of Jews. Ran can correct me, maybe 85%. The other thing to take home is to use the word far or extreme, and let me explain. I hear many Jews talking about Muslims, talking about the left, talking about the right. No, you must add extreme Islamism, you must add far left and far right. As I see it, anti-Semitism is like a Borromean three circles. So you have the far left, far right, and far or extreme Islamism. So this is just 5% of Muslims. Statistics shows that only 1% of Muslims are actually capable of, like terrorist attack. 1%, still it's a lot, but 1% of 1 million, it's only 10,000. It's not like there. I mean, so this is like Bondi, like it said. So the far and the extreme are like that. So the extreme right and the extreme left, they hate the establishment. The extreme right and the extreme Islamism hate LGBT. The extreme left and the extreme Islamism, is it? What is left? They hate the West. In the middle, you have, this is the crux, they hate the Jews. So this is the far left, the far right, and the extreme Islam. Don't say Muslims, don't say leftists, this is something to take away. Otherwise, we will have everybody hating us. We want to have friends. We need some friends. Unfortunately, we don't have too many friends, especially at universities in Australia.
I'll be brief. First, educate yourself. Second, ask questions. Don't go and be aggressive. Ask questions. When you ask questions, people start to think. And if you ask questions, if the other side is open for discussion, there will be discussion. If not, then it's a lost cause. Third thing, cool it. Yalis was talking from the mamad, from the sheltered room. There's no mamads, there's no sheltered rooms in Australia. We're still not at that situation. So just cool it.
That is a nice positive note to end on. I think, can we get Ayal back on screen? Or is that possible? I think Ayal wanted just to make some closing remarks. So I'll hand it over to you, Ayal.
Thank you. Good attention to detail, Ran, who is the Mamad. Mamad is a safe room for those of you who do not know. I'm speaking to you from Israel at the moment, and all new houses are being built with a safe room. Let's hope that we don't have to do that in Australia. I would like to take this opportunity to provide a bit of a wider perspective, couple of minutes, placing the anti-Zionism campaign in the global geopolitical context. There is one reality that, in my view, many Jews throughout the diaspora, as well as non-Jews in the Western world, have yet to understand. This problem cannot be escaped, or nor can it be contained through silence or avoiding confrontation. Every time Jewish communities choose not to confront it, in the hope that it will simply fade away, it grows stronger. History has repeatedly shown that concessions, silence, and the fear of drawing clear lines do not diminish hatred, they encourage it. Unless Jewish communities are prepared to defend themselves with determination in the public sphere, in the courts, in politics, and in the media, nothing will change. On the contrary, we may soon discover that the societies in which we live, or have been living safely for generations, are no longer able or willing to protect us. I believe the greatest mistake the West continues to make is viewing reality through isolated events and through naive lenses instead of recognizing the broader picture. This is not merely a war about Israel, it's not merely a war about Gaza, nor is it simply a struggle against anti-Semitism. In my view, it is a much deeper conflict. It's a clash between two fundamentally different civilizations. Many people will say, but I know Muslims who are kind, law-abiding, and simply want to live peaceful ways. Or like Gilad say, it's the extremes. I absolutely agree. I do not question that for a moment. There are undoubtedly many such people, but that is not the real issue. The question is not whether there are decent or moderate Muslims. The question is which ideology is driving the movements that seek to shape the political and social reality of Western societies. In my view, Islamism, or political Islam in its extreme, I would add, thanks to Gilad's comment, is an ideology with political and imperial ambitions. Its objective is not limited to influencing countries with Muslim majorities. It seeks to reshape the character of the societies in which it operates and gradually replace the values of liberal democracy with an entirely different system. The war in Gaza, together with the use of legal vocabulary and allegations of genocide, occupation, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, and apartheid, have become one of the primary instruments in which this broader campaign. In my opinion, these claims are not the root of the conflict, but a means of mobilizing support, generating political pressure, and expanding influence across the world. Even if the war were to end tomorrow, the ideology behind this movement would remain. It did not begin in October 7th, and it will not end with the conclusion of the current conflict. Liberal democracy is one of humanity's greatest achievements. Yet, precisely because it is open, tolerant, and committed to protecting individual freedoms, it is vulnerable to those who are willing to exploit those very freedoms in order to undermine it from within. And a society that refuses to defend itself in the name of tolerance may eventually discover that its tolerance has been turned against it. The real question, therefore, is not whether we like or dislike any particular religion. The question is whether the West is capable of recognizing ideologies that seek to transform its identity and whether it possesses the resolve to confront them before it is too late. As long as the conversation remains focused solely on Gaza, solely on Israel, or solely on anti-Semitism, we will fail to recognize the larger struggle. In my view, and I'm about to end, this is a battle over the future of Western civilization and its ability to preserve itself. History teaches us that free societies which fail to recognize ideological threats in time often realize the magnitude of the danger only when reversing the course has become extraordinarily difficult. We hope that this session is helping in equipping you and us with knowledge and tools to support our community and society at large to stand together against those aiming to undermine us. So on behalf of ARTSA, I would like to end by thanking all of you for showing up and for caring, and to thank our great panelists for sharing their knowledge and insights, Melinda, Ran, and Gilad, as well as Artenu and Kakal, and finally to thank Karen for taking my place and running and organizing all of this. Thank you all very much for supporting this series, and Yishar Koach to all. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayal, and yeah, my thanks as well to our three distinguished speakers. It was very insightful and a lot of food for thought. I think we've got a lot to think about when we leave tonight.